Greetings, peasants. Welcome to the Crabby Tabby Report, your one and only source for news, nonsense, and absolutely no tolerance for stupidity. I am your host, Precious McFluffybutt, known to some as the Crabby Tabby, and today we begin with a most essential tale. How exactly I, a dignified and intelligent feline of the 16th century, have found myself in this unhinged fever dream of a timeline known as 2025. Before we go any further, let's be clear. This was not my idea. The blame rests squarely on the narrow, hunched shoulders of my so-called mistress, Mildred, a witch whose curiosity is only matched by her appalling lack of foresight. And so, with that clarification out of the way, let us begin the tragic tale of my forced transition from a life of medieval luxury and journal tales of the Tabby Diaries to whatever this is. The backstory. Once upon a time, specifically in 1537, I lived the quiet, dignified life of a medieval mouser. My days consisted of lounging in the sun-dappled beams of our crooked, charming cottage deep near the Whispering Woods. I had a vast domain of fields and forest to patrol, a warm hearth to sleep beside, and an endless supply of foolish rodents who thought they stood a chance against my superior hunting skills. From time to time I would accompany on her shenanigans and trips which I usually rued the day. Mildred, my human, if one can truly call her mine, when she so often insists on thinking for herself, was a mediocre witch, dabbling in potions, prophecy, and the occasional hex when the mood struck her. I must admit I found her company tolerable, even pleasant at times. She understood that I was not to be disturbed unless absolutely necessary, and she ensured that my meals were delivered promptly, fresh and never of questionable origin. We had an arrangement, and it worked well, but then curiosity got the better of her as it always does, and that's where the trouble began. The vision of 2025. It started innocently enough. Mildred, in her insatiable need to know things, began glimpsing into the far future, snippets of events, people, and places so far removed from our time that they may as well have been another world entirely. She saw great towers of glass, carriages without horses, tiny boxes filled with moving images, and naturally, she insisted on sharing these visions with me. I humored her at first, as one does when dealing with a particularly excitable peasant. I even found some amusement in the absurdities she described. People paying for water, screaming into small glowing slabs, grown men dancing in fields for no reason other than to go viral. Whatever that means. Hilarious. But then she began seeing news. Real news. And that's when the fun stopped. The political madness of your era. The first thing that caught my attention was a man named Trump, a loud orange-skinned fellow who somehow managed to rule over the most powerful nation in your world, despite possessing the temperament of an alley tomcat who's lost one too many fights. At first, I thought Mildred was playing a joke. Surely no serious nation would allow such a figure to lead them. And yet, there he was, screaming into microphones, calling himself a very stable genius, and picking fights with anyone who dared challenge his fragile ego. It was like watching a rooster declare himself king of the barnyard, loud, ridiculous, and ultimately incapable of producing an egg. Then came the international feuds, one of which, to my horror, involved Canada. Imagine my offense upon discovering that the nation where Mildred and I had taken residence was being insulted by this deranged rooster man. I watched as he threatened trade wars, slapped tariffs on Canadian goods, and even tried to claim that Canada posed a threat to his country. Canada, The land of politeness, cold weather, and universal health care. If that is a threat, I shudder to think what true danger looks like to these people. I suspect he intends to invade our lands, and I can tell you right now that these sweet and kind people here in Canada are having none of that. But the true horror I'm yet to explain. The war in Ukraine. War in the modern era. How have you learned nothing? Now, in my time, war was a brutal but understandable reality. Kings fought for land, gold, or because someone had insulted someone's mother. It was predictable. But your wars, they make no sense. In 2022, a man named Putin, whom I can only assume is the reincarnation of every warlord who ever failed history class, decided he wished to reclaim Ukraine, despite the rather obvious fact that Ukraine had no interest in being reclaimed. The resulting devastation is something even I, a seasoned hunter, find difficult to watch. Cities turned to rubble, civilians fleeing for their lives, the world watching as yet another power-hungry fool drags thousands to their deaths. And what does the rest of your world do? Some send aid, some impose sanctions, but mostly, they just talk. If there is one thing I have learned in my time in 2025, it is that your world is astonishingly good at talking about problems while being utterly incapable of solving them. And now I hear this rooster Trump and the weasel, Putin, are as thick as thieves and planning on stabbing Ukraine in the back. So there you have it. You can see how I, a noble feline of the 16th century, was hurled into this madhouse of a timeline to comment on your bizarre customs, political disasters, and never-ending conflicts in an effort to knock some sense into your heads. Do not mistake this for enjoyment. I do not enjoy this, but duty calls, and if I must suffer through 2025, then at the very least, I shall do so with biting commentary and a well-deserved air of superiority. If you've enjoyed this little dive into history, absurdity, and feline wisdom, consider giving this video a like. It helps ensure that my sharp insights and Mildred's occasional mutterings reach more of your fellow peasants. And if you truly appreciate having a time-traveling tabby break down the world's chaos, feel free to subscribe. It won't make 2025 any less ridiculous, but at least you'll have me to guide you through it with my usual wit and impeccable judgment. This has been the Crabby Tabby Report. News, nonsense, and a no-tolerance policy for stupidity. Until next time, try not to embarrass yourselves further.